Hello there, and many thanks for joining us on the program that explores contemporary issues in politics, leadership, power relations, and development at every level. I am Imonia Marire. 3 weeks after fighting erupted in Sudan between the military and the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, the hitherto tranquil capital, Khartoum, has been transformed into an active war zone. Hundreds and thousands of foreigners and Sudanese alike have fled the country. Several truce or ceasefire agreements have failed to stop the fighting and the killings. Another of such initiative, that is another ceasefire initiative, and the first face-to-face talks between the warring parties is currently taking place in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in the hope that it will stop the ongoing carnage. The latest effort is at the instance of Saudi Arabia, the United States, the African Union, and the 8-member regional body, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, in Eastern Africa. The rival generals at the center of the crisis, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohamed Hamdallo Daglo, otherwise known as Hemdit, are not attending the meeting. Instead, they have each sent a 3-person negotiating team to Jeddah. The negotiators and the generals say the agenda of the Jeddah talks is not to silence the guns, but to put in place a humanitarian ceasefire, a monitoring mechanism, and corridors for aid to reach the suffering and wounded people of Sudan. None of the warring groups appear interested in negotiating in the negotiations towards a political settlement. They are, so far, insisting on a military solution that will see one of them in dominant control, or at best, share Sudan as the spoils of war. It's a delicate and fragile situation for Sudan and its neighbors. Sudan is no stranger to wars and crises. It experienced a civil war in 1983 and again in Darfur 20 years later in 2003, and several other conflicts in Abyei, Heglig, and the Nuba Mountains regions. But in all, none has hit the capital Khartoum this hard before. Is the current crisis purely internal, or are there outside forces involved? How will it impact the peace and stability of the region going forward? What can be done to save Sudan from the generals? Already, Nigeria, like many other countries, has been evacuating its citizens from Sudan. As of Sunday, May 7, 2023, it has evacuated over 1,700 stranded Nigerians from both Aswan Airport in Egypt and Port Sudan since the exercise began last Wednesday. The Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management and the Nigerian Diaspora Commission has said no stranded Nigerian will be left behind. 7 batches of evacuees have arrived in Abuja since May 3, when it commenced. The good news is that no Nigerian life has been lost so far. We shall be joined on the program today by 2 international affairs specialists to give us some more insight into the festering crisis in Sudan and its possible impact on neighboring countries as well as the entire Sahel region. We will get to meet our guest analysts immediately after this short break. Stay with us. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. People, politics, and power. You will recall that during our last edition, we focus attention on the efforts by the Nigerian government at evacuating stranded Nigerians from Sudan through the Egyptian airport in Aswan, and of course the efforts at that time that were being made to also evacuate other Nigerians from Port Sudan. Well, today we're going to be focusing attention not just on the Nigerians who were or are still in the Sudan, but we'll be looking at the entire situation in the Sudan and how it is going to, or it is impacting already on the region, the sub-region, and the larger African continent. I'm joined in the studio by two foreign affairs specialists and analysts. First, from my right is Rekia Ibrahim Amedu. She is an international affairs specialist. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us is Vitus Okonkwo, who is an international affairs specialist. Thank you so much for joining us. Great. So let me begin with you. Did the crisis in the Sudan, which erupted April 15th, come to you as a surprise, given the history of the struggle, as it were, by democratic forces in the Sudan for several years, but particularly between 2019 and now?
Thank you so much. I am not surprised to see what is going on in Sudan. As a person, I'm not surprised, because if you have been following up what is going on so far, you are going to realize that the Sudanese have allowed themselves to be influenced by so many factors within and outside their countries. And when you allow people to decide for you, instead of you deciding the fate of your country, you put together heads as friends to unseat a sitting president, and you could not go ahead and identify how to control the country. They allowed themselves to be controlled by external forces, and that has been happening even before the split of Southern Sudan. It's the same thing that happened. They have consistently allowed themselves to be used by external forces, and each time it happens, I'm not surprised to see it.
We'll come back to talk about those external forces, who they are, what they are, and what their interests are in the Sudan. But first, let me come to you, Mr. Okonkwo. How strategic is Sudan in by its placement in the northern Africa, in the Arab world, and in the Sahel region, extending down to Nigeria?
Yeah, the Sudan occupy a very, very important position in their position in North Africa and Africa in general. Looking at their position around the Red Sea, the Suez Canal. So any crisis that affects Sudan, that will get up to the Suez and Red Sea, that can affect movement of trade ships along that region, will entirely affect the whole countries around the neighborhood. So that is why it's important that the crisis in Sudan is all international stakeholders put heads together. I thank God for the meeting going on at the Saudi Arabia Jeddah, looking at means and ways that this crisis can be called to order. So that Sudan itself occupy a position within the Red Sea area, which the flow of trade and the movement at the Suez Canal area is very important in Africa, especially down up to down.
Because that's a question I was just going to ask you. What's the importance of the Red Sea and the Suez Canal? How connected are they, and how strategic, what is their strategic importance to Sudan and to the rest of the African countries along that line?
That is an economic viable speed line or red line, that all economic activities, the shipping activities and movement of vessels and everything are passed through there. So once there is any harm along that region, it would immediately affect all those countries that their movement of their goods and properties pass through those areas. Automatically, those countries behind this area that make use of this particular track line will be automatically affected. The cost of their goods, their internal planning and everything will be affected at the same time. That is why nobody should go and relax that it is Sudan. Invariably, the same way it has affected most countries that everybody is doing evacuation now. This night, India is running around to see how about 3,000 people can be taken away from Sudan and back to India. Most countries are doing the same thing. So Sudan occupied that important region by the virtue of that, their location at the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. So it's important that something is done to make sure that the situation is remedied, to have Sudan at a possible peace line, that other countries that would have been affected by this crisis will be safe from this situation.
Madam Amedu, you have spoken about external forces. There are those who have suggested that Sudan, like many other African countries, and in fact third world countries, when crises brew or erupt like this, they always almost immediately finger certain external forces as being responsible. But in the case of Sudan, is it just simply that of external forces? I miss the fact that some are suggesting that what is happening in Sudan is a replication of the global struggle for strategic interest.
Yeah, you can't rule out the strategic interest out of it. It's major in it. But so doing, if you are in control and you are able to do that within the axis of keeping away external people, you understand, you keep your country safe. Of course, it's good to agitate. It's good to want to be in control. It's an agreement between both of them to take the power from Bashir. So what stopped them from being able to agree again how to control the country? So, you see, I want to remind you of something, sir. If you remember slavery, what we are seeing now is still an extension of slavery. Africa is not out of it completely up to now. When they are done with physical slavery, they have now gone to mental slavery. That is what we are suffering with. All African countries are still under mental slavery. Why am I saying that? If you and I are friends and we decide to put together a business of taking power from someone, we should equally stay back and decide how we share the power. But a situation where you are told your right is being infringed, where it may not be true, and you agree that a business is being brought by an external country you want to handle as a power, part of the power, which you think you are having right, and another one said no, it has to be the other power who should bring this business. You could not agree, and you allow yourself, okay, don't allow this man. If you allow that man, you become. That is what is going on, sir. They are having the personal interest of controlling the country, good. External forces have businesses they want to do with one of them. This one said, no, I'm not going to agree with ABC example, Russia. America will say no. America will say, no, Russia is not good. Russia will say, America, don't accept it. So when you are both instigated, don't accept. They are not asking you to take arm, but they are equally instigating you to fight. If you are fighting, you are going to, of course, at the end of the day, take arm. That's why I think that I believe, as a person, that we are still under slavery in Africa. We want to amass wealth, that is our personal interest, whichever way it comes, we are ready. Then put the country at risk by trying to go through country ABC, who equally have their own interests. External forces have Africa as their heaven, sir, you know that? Everything we have is supposed to be under their control, and we are fighting to try and control. So they forget about physical slavery of taking human being from one country to another now, and come to you. Please, if you allow that man, now he will be in control. So you should be the one. And instigating me, another country is instigating you, and that is why the war is intense.
So is it a question of just personal political power struggle and economic interest? that are associated with that power and authority.
Yes, sir.
That is very much at play here between the two warring generals. Or are there other internal factors within Sudan itself now that may have either prompted or is fueling the relentless attacks on each other and the destruction of a country such as Sudan? I'd like you to reflect on the fact that several years back, there was the very fratricidal war in the Darfur region of the country. Yes. That has almost reduced that region to nothing. And now it's shifted from the Darfur, although part of it is still going in Darfur, but to Khartoum, the capital city.
Yeah, this particular issue could be best related to when the two elephants are fighting the grassy surface. The two generals involved has been very popularly known to have capacity in terms of controlling the boys and the military over time. If you watch, one of them was in charge of the Janjaweed, which was a kind of militia group created in the area of Darfur during the crisis in Darfur.
Was used by al-Bashir actually to suppress the rebellion in that part of the
al-Bashir gave room for this holy marriage among the two generals. But immediately that military junta took over power in Sudan. And this other general felt slighted and that their cause are not being kept. Then they raise arm against the other. So going to your question, which you asked about whether it has the economic tool or only political tool, the political tool goes hand in hand with the economic tool. So once you are in charge of power and control of the state, you control the economy of the state because your policies and program will run the same time Paris Faso. So when you see both of them fighting, they are fighting the same time power, they are fighting the same time economy, they are fighting the same time their egos. If you watch what is going on now, the other general, popularly called
Dagalo. General Dagalo,
yes, yes, he said he's in charge. This one is claiming I'm in control and nothing has happened, but the fight is going down and casualties are increasing day by day. So the fight in Sudan is a kind of personal interest fight between the two generals, which has rubbed off into struggle for power and control of the economy. And you know the control of the economy in the international system has interest. That is wartime purchase of every time. The international black marketeers in the international community are eager and waiting. Once you are at war, let's say you produce crude oil, you are at war, they will come to the back to say, one barrel. In a normal time, without a wartime purchase, you can buy one barrel of crude oil for $1,000. But during wartime purchase, you can get it at $300. So having 700, they have saved. So the international black marketeers are equally watching Sudan. There are lots, and Africans are blessed with a whole lot of mineral resources and raw materials that feed other nations of the world. So immediately there is a fight, you allow yourself to go into such a battle between you and the other generals, you will see them. That is why people are having insinuations and assumptions today that from this end, Russia is having an input and influencing the other. People are having the belief from this other end that America is equally having their own agenda being pushed by one of them. Then trying to give the picture that, oh, this particular war is externally influenced completely, but no. The Sudanese, who will not forget, went against their president. The ouster of the president have long stayed in power. And what did they demand for? That they want democracy. That is what they want. And immediately the military took over. They promised them there's going to be democracy after a few months. And they agreed to institute a committee that will now plan how election can take place and people will be voted to power. And immediately, you know, military, the way they operate, they took over power, they began to shift the goalpost from what it is. So Dia gave room to all that has risen. So we will not forget that hurry, that the interests of both big men are the elephants who are fighting, but the grasses are in perils right now. And we will not forget that once you have gone to war, you have created a black market for the black market, international black market marketeers, who will take advantage of wartime purchase to make both ends meet.
So let's look inwards again and look at the kind of natural resources that are available in the Sudan that may actually be aggravating this crisis. Because as we read and as we hear, one of the two generals involved here is in firm control of some of the natural resources and has long been a dealer in these an exporter, if you may, of some of these natural resources. Could this also be one of the things that is propelling all of this?
Sir, when my colleague here just mentioned, remember he said economic, political, and personal are mostly the reasons why African countries, especially Sudan right now, are always going to war. How to get it done within themselves, they could not. They involve external forces, and these people are in need of this that they don't have. We are blessed in Africa to have deposit of all this, but the foreign countries depend on us for them. So, as far as I am concerned, economic is majorly part of the reason why they are at war.
The desire to continue to mine gold, for instance, and control such resources it appears to be one of the major factors at the center of this crisis.
Yes. Sudan has a huge deposit of gold, uranium, iron ore, even what is it called? Marble and mica. So these are very huge markets in the international community and in very high demand. So like I said earlier, once the fight that would have started as a result of breach of that gentleman agreement, after the protest, the military took over, the general helped in stabilizing the system and saying, okay, we are going to go back to democracy within time. But when the other general was not seen to have kept that accord, the heaven let loose among the big men, and the fight is on the table right now. So automatically, those natural resources in the area, which, if not the fight, would have gone into normal trade and sales, become a center of economic scavengers, who would automatically come in. Those illegal gold miners will come into the area, secure this area, fight and secure the area, we will mine and pay you.
They are living, excuse me, these miners are not just going to come. They are living within them in Sudan. Yes. They've been there. It's just for opportunity like this to come up and put up the control, the internal control of government, and they just get in whatever they want to.
So the external factor here could be said to have been driven by the interests of those economic interests of the outside states. Those interests, those businessmen in the area who now see that, yes, this is an opportunity from both ends to make wartime purchase and make more profit. And Africa generally has been a victim of this.
But don't businesses thrive on an atmosphere or in an environment of peace?
Businesses and transactions can be done in atmosphere of peace. But if it is done in atmosphere of peace, it will be done with the international market price. You cannot sell a 1 gram of gold below the gold price in the international market. But in the atmosphere of crisis, you sell it at a wartime price, where it will not be the conventional market price of those goods or other raw materials in the country. So automatically, it's called in the international system a wartime purchase. That is what the developed countries have used against Africa in most cases. And that has accounted to the underdeveloping Africa. Because once there is agitations, those interests will quickly come in. And our people will be misled into saying, oh, they thought that the system is going to help them, that those who are funding the war meant for good. They don't know that their purely reason is to make more money, make the state dry. Before the end of the fight, the wartime purchase must have taken turn on them that what on a normal business ground, the state would have made so much money that would have developed all sectors in the state will be in danger. So that's why it is very advisable that those African leaders involved, like the two generals, should understand that Sudan is their country. Sudan is their home. Those lives, those over 300 people that have died in the course of this 3 weeks crisis are their citizens. Deserve
over 500,000.
Today, over 500,000, over 500,000,
yes.
they deserve to live. The resources of the state, which automatically is alleged that can be balkanized by the black marketers, racketeers in the city would have been used to develop Sudan. Sudan is on record one of the poorest countries in the world. And what have continued to make them poor is sensibilities of their leaders who are not able to understand that this war today, war tomorrow does not give them any good. That is where I'm much more interested in lessons to be learned by the war in Sudan in other countries in Africa, like Nigeria, for instance. We go too easily to fan the embers of war. We must understand that to learn from what has happened to others. The unity and joy we share today is a strength, and we must look at what is happening in other countries to be able to form deterrents. You understand? So when we begin to flay nerves and call all sorts of names, tribes rising against the other tribe, language rising against the other language, religion rising against the other religion, forgetting that once the fight starts, your grandmother in the village will be a victim. Your children in the school will be a victim. You may equally become homeless. So it is important we learn when those Africans are giving room to destabilizing their country through war and presenting their God-given resources into that balkanization of wartime purchase and that destructive economic threat for the people of Sudan.
We'll come back to learning the lessons. Again, I would go back to how the RSF itself emerged during the al-Bashir era and why it was set up as a checkmate to the military. Al-Bashir himself came into a military coup, transformed into a civilian president, as it were, and needed a buffer between the military and himself. We'll come back to that later on, but let's look at the sustainability or otherwise of the ongoing crisis in the Sudan. These are factions of the same military apparatus. One begins to wonder, where are they getting their arms and ammunition from? Who are they getting it from? And how can they sustain this war? Because each of them, I mean, talking of the two generals, has sworn that they will not put down their arms. The fact they are working towards the defeat of each other. They have been calling each other names. One is great, this one is a rebel. The other one says this one must die for peace to reign.
Yeah, in all honesty, the only solution to the war in Sudan is what the negotiation that's going on right now in Jeddah.
The negotiations in Jeddah is just for humanitarian purpose. They have made that very clear. It is not to silence the guns.
Then the AU must do something, because ego of those two warring factions is they have very high ego and nobody is ready to step it down. So as long as they are not ready to step it down, they continually approach these foreign powers for guns, and they are getting. Those people are selling their guns, and as the war continues, they are making their money. So none of these foreign powers will ask them to stop, apart from us, the Africans, apart from our leaders in Africa. So as far as I am concerned, the only solution to what is going on in Sudan now is for AU to step in, just as they used to do. I know they have always been doing, but we have stubborn leaders in Africa. We have stubborn brothers. As soon as they are at war, they forget what joined them. What is dividing them is what they concentrate on. They are not going to remember the simple fact that they have been divinely living together, not as a result of their making, but as done by God, put them together in Sudan. They have forgotten this, and they have exposed themselves, their country, their nationals to destruction. And these people that are ready to make money, make headways, develop their own countries with our own resources of Africa, they are making it through the factions. The two of them are believing. As far as they are concerned, they believe that they will continue and one person must fail. As long as that ego is there, they are going to destroy our brothers in Sudan. Their own brothers, their blood brothers in Sudan. They continue to fight. They will continue to get the gun because they all have the resources to get the guns. And the business handlers, or the producers of nuclear or whatever weapon they are using, they are there making their weapon. Russia is ready to sell. America is ready. So wherever America can bring Russia down to sell its own, they will do. Wherever Russia will bring America down to sell their guns. We are still under slavery. That is my understanding, sir.
So how much leverage, Mr. Konko, how much leverage does the AU, for instance, have over the situation in the Sudan? How can the AU, what can the AU do? I mean, the AU does not have a standing army of its own that would move in and say, we are here for peacekeeping, for instance, or we are here to stop this madness that is ongoing. How much leverage does it have? How much leverage does the European Union, for instance, have? How much leverage does the US, which is very reluctant to put any boots on ground anywhere around the world, how much of the such leverage do these groups, the IGAD, for instance, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the other members of the Gulf countries?
Okay, you know, the diplomacy has much strength and power than the guns most times when well applied. Negotiations are more powerful and strong more than weapons and arms of destruction. That's why wars and battles that have gone in history, many of them have been resolved in diplomacy and negotiation. So it is not, we cannot say that AU cannot do anything, but the African heads of state need to come out quickly to make sure that negotiations and interventions by various leaders and stakeholders will commence by both ends. There must be one that can influence one of them in one way or the other. The war going on in Sudan will continue if you leave them with the hands of the ravagers, because they must continue to do their business. Arms will come. There are wartime arm dealers. Arm dealers can even fund war so that they can sell their outdated arms and weapons. So if the war continues to make them more vulnerable to those people who have some arms produced years back that have not been used, have not been sold. So anywhere there is war is a market for them.
A testing ground too.
Yes. So those people are out there, gingering them and giving them all sorts of rifles to test at the battlefield that they have them and collecting money and making a whole lot of money. So now the AU has a responsibility as a union. The other international stakeholders like the EU you talked about and all relevant stakeholders and leaders have a responsibility.
And the UN itself.
That's why the meeting going on in Saudi Arabia, which was talking about the humanitarian ground. And that is a better ground. From the humanitarian aspect, it can go to the core issues. So it's important to have such interventions, which are remedial interventions that can seriously attack the situation, and the war can have a hope of dropping their guns and saving their nations. So all these relevant stakeholders, the African Union, the EU, the other senior big players in the international community, has to come in. Diplomacy is a stronger tool that can save you weapons and save you destruction of life and bring about peace. So I believe it can be done.
There is ample evidence now to suggest that certain mercenary groups are already involved in the war in the Sudan. For instance, the Wagner group, the Russian Wagner group, is said to be very actively involved now in the Sudan in support of one of the factions, one of the two generals. Now, how disruptive can that be? How much of that can actually continue to fuel the crisis and prevent serious mediation from taking place when mercenaries get involved in wars?
Sir, if you listen to the beginning of our discussion, I said these people are already involved, and thank God you're confirming it. They are involved. Russia is actively involved as external forces. Remember, you have just confirmed that it's external. External, Russia is there, and America, on the other hand, has decided to join. Because as long as Russia is in any place, America is feeling threatened. Any situation that has to do with war, Russia is in it, America will find a way to get involved. Because you remember there are two rivals, two big rivals, and they use us to whatever solve their own giant problem. Just as the other colleague said, when two elephant fights, the grass suffers. America and Russia have agreed to be permanent enemies, and wherever anyone have interest is already an interest of the opponent.
Doesn't that raise another concern that if powers, regional and global powers, get involved in a crisis like this, and they are involved in a situation like this, it makes it more difficult for them to broker honest peace? Isn't that so?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it makes it very, very difficult. But if the AU, as it were, will stand up and live up to their expectation, of course, diplomacy is key. As soon as the leaders of Africa are ready for this peace and they come out en masse, speaking in one voice, these people, they have interest in other countries too. For instance, you can't tell me that America want to have problem with Nigeria. They will not want. Equally, Russia will not want to have problem because they all have one or two things. The dealings they have with us in terms of our endowment. They are interested in our God-given endowment. So if they see all of us as Africans, all African leaders put heads together, they want peace in Sudan today, and they put diplomacy, put the discussion on table, dialogue, and tell these two people, this is the stand of African leaders, this is what we want in our country, in our continent. Sudan is part of us, and we want peace there. I don't think they have a choice.
Yes, like I said earlier, in the international community, you do not, the way said that you do not negotiate with fear, you always negotiate. And that there's no type of war that cannot be negotiated. If the Ukraine-Russia war up to 1 year ago, negotiations have been put on the table, diplomatic positions and programs are being raised so that peace can come. I believe that what is happening in Sudan, once the real mercenaries are activated, diplomatic tool from other blocs and the African Union and the leaders of African heads of states, the peace we look for can come. But the issue we are raising about the Wagner group and other those are allegations that have not been on record where America is said to be involved actively in that Sudan crisis. Even Russia have not been practically openly said to be on record involved. But the cases of Wagner and other interests, which could be linked to America and Russia are being seen. People are now assuming and saying that this is what it is. So America in themselves,
these powers these days
and
have
the Russia
adopted a
themselves
new strategy
owe us
of
a responsibility
operating
to
through
come
proxies.
open. That's the area I'm going to go because it's part of diplomacy.
Yes.
If these concerns are being raised, that in this angle, Russia is fueling the crisis, America is fueling the crisis, America owe the world, Africa, a responsibility to come clear and state their position. And it could equally be a deterrent. Russia owed Africa and Sudan the responsibility to come clean and said, we are not involved or we are involved. That will go a long way diplomatically to check the situation.
And none of them has done so.
None of them have done so. So I am calling on them through this medium that they need to come clean and tell the whole world their position on what is going on in the Sudan. Especially now they're being alleged to, in proxy, playing active role. And that is very important in negotiating peace in Sudan. Because by the time America comes out to say we are not, are you getting it? The Russia comes out to say we are not. Then the African leaders will have a pedestal at which they will now negotiate. If you say you are not involved, Wagner Group, are you getting it? Call them to order. We knew that they of Russian origin and have that Russian relationship. Call them to order. Then if there's other group that is found out to have link with America, and you are still playing a role in the fight in Sudan, and since America have come open to say we don't have a hand, we don't have an interest, they will be called to order to say, call them to order. They listen to you. They can be linked to you. So call them to order. So I believe the Saudi Arabia peace meeting will come, and from there, we'll take it up from there, and we are calling on all relevant stakeholders in the African politics, the AU and other heads of states, to come clean and intervene in one way or the other.
Saudi Arabia itself that has provided the venue for these negotiations, for these talks. You recall that one of the groups in the Sudanese crisis sent soldiers to fight alongside Saudi Arabian forces in Yemen. So how much honesty can they bring to resolving this crisis by hosting these talks?
Very deep question there, because as far as I know, the role Saudi is playing in the Gulf region, you already know what happened in Kuwait, you know what happened in Iraq. Saudi is always not honest. Pardon me to use that word. I'm a Muslim. We all believe in Saudi is our holy city. But the role they play in terms of war, in all honesty, especially within the Gulf region, is always dicey. We don't believe they stand straight in situation to solve them. See what happened in Libya. See what is happening in Palestine. So you see African countries more interested in peace of Gulf region than Saudi themselves. Though on the surface of it, they always present themselves ready to negotiate, to stop the war, but deep down, diplomatically, I've been with them sometimes in the past. If you check properly, you are going to see that what they do is more on the surface than in reality. So, but yeah, what is going on right now may have a solution, because apart from Saudi alone, there are other countries that are interested, and they have actually shown Saudi that they are interested in peace in Sudan. So if you want relationship with these particular countries, they have already shown you they need peace in Sudan. They have to come out clear and make it a reality. That's what I believe.
Well, in the international community, no one is an island. One way or the other, we all take common advantage being around and close to each other. That is why all treaties and all commitment and international commitment that we've entered is targeting one good or the other. So I say that to mean Saudi Arabia thank them for making that step towards peace. And other leaders in Africa, the AU, should get involved. And other relevant organizations like the EU court should get involved to know. They said yes, it's humanitarian, but since the two leaders have nominated their representatives, beyond the humanitarian corridors to grant access so that people will not die, the real issues can be looked into. And it is not far-fetched. From the hillside the other day, the issue was clear. Both of them were looking at a settlement ground, that what we agreed when you took over should be resolved. It's already known. So the two generals should be made to now come to round table where there can be an understanding and agreement. So to save their country from destruction, save their economy from destruction, place on their ego. And the African Union can do this. The African leaders can do this. Like Saudi have taken it upon themselves. One, if Saudi goes to Sudan with an intention that is not too clear, or maybe that could jeopardize the peace that we seek, there are other countries in Africa that Saudi rely on in one or two areas, which could equally rise up to say, we want you to take this part in respect to our relationship with you. That's why there's no country that is an island. So the peace we seek can be achieved through the diplomacy and negotiation.
Let's spend the remaining time we have looking at lessons for the rest of Africa. Like I said earlier on, when al-Bashir came to power, through a military coup, he set up the RSF as a counterforce to the military, because he knew that as a military head of state, the military coup also overthrow him. And they did overthrow him eventually after over 2 decades in power. But in collaboration with the RSF, which he himself set up. So one is beginning to wonder how African leaders and African governments can begin to learn lessons from what has happened in the Sudan, both in the past and in the present, the current crisis in that country.
African leaders over the years are susceptible to have made themselves and their country susceptible to this kind of crisis, interventions from wherever, because of self-interest, trying to amass wealth or resources to themselves, and trying to rule or to relinquish power to others has been a problem to them. Since we are all seeing what is happening in Sudan, we have had our own Nigeria. I thank God, before Ojukwu left this world, he told us that he led civil war, and the next one is not necessary. So I'm happy we have that, and whatever agitation we are having, Boko Haram here and there, that is where it will stop. As far as I believe, our country will never go to war. But what of other African countries? We see what is happening in Sudan right now. The decisions that African leaders need to have is for them to know that nothing on earth lasts forever. The life itself is not forever. You live, there's a time to be born, time to die. So also time to come to power and time to leave the power. As long as they decide and they realize this, that there's time to leave power, they are not thinking of sitting on the throne permanently. Take for example, al-Bashir himself, 2 decades. It's too much. 8 years would have been enough, 2 tenure. But he decided to stay there 2 decades until he was also forced away. So I want African leaders to learn from what is happening, perpetually happening in Africa, to change their mindset of trying to live or to die on the throne.
Okay. Well, don't go quickly.
Yes. African leaders must give attention to feeling of injustice. They must give attention to poverty. They must give attention to democracy. they must give attention to taking care of their economy. These are the salient factors that fund all this in Africa. Our leaders do not want to. They must equally take, that was when I talk about democracy, they must be willing to serve and leave office.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Mr. Vitus Okonkwo, International Affairs Analyst. He's been joined by Rekia Ibrahim Amedu, who is also an international affairs specialist. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
All right, for you, our viewers out there, we want to thank you immensely for investing your time with us today on the program. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power as we continue to interrogate contemporary issues in politics, governance, and, of course, the interaction of power with the people. Bye for now.